The smell hit Corporal James Hendricks before he saw the cave mouth. Not the expected rot of death or cordite, but something else. Something sweet and wrong, like flowers left too long in a closed room. His squad had cleared 17 caves that week on Okinawa. The Japanese defenders fought to the last man in every one. But this cave was different. The Okinawan locals who'd been pressed into service as guides stopped 30 yards out, refused to go closer. One of them, an old man who'd barely flinched when mortars landed 10 feet away, was crying. Not from fear of Japanese soldiers. He kept repeating two words: Kijimuna Yabu, cave demons. Hendricks was about to order them forward when he heard it. A sound that shouldn't exist, coming from deep in the mountain. A sound that made him realize the old man wasn't afraid of what might be in that cave. He was afraid of what definitely was. April 1945. Southern Okinawa had become a maze of coral limestone and blood. The island was honeycombed with caves, natural tunnels carved by millennia of water and wind, expanded by Japanese engineers into a subterranean fortress. Every cave held the possibility of ambush. Machine gun nests, grenade attacks, soldiers who'd sworn never to surrender. Hendricks had cleared 17 of them in the past 2 weeks. Each one the same brutal calculus. Throw in smoke grenades, wait for return fire. Send in the flamethrower team if resistance persisted. Clear the dead, move to the next one. Before the war, Hendricks had been studying civil engineering at Ohio State. He understood geology, structural integrity, the mathematics of how stone bore weight. He was 22 years old and believed in what could be measured, tested, proven. And the caves were just tactical problems. Equations of sight lines and suppressive fire. Nothing more. That certainty died at Cave 23. The approach took them through what had been a village. American artillery had reduced it to foundations and ash. The morning was already hot. The kind of wet heat that soaked through your utilities before you'd walked 100 yards. Hendricks' squad moved in standard formation, scouts forward, main body 50 yards back, barman covering their advance. The usual sounds of war echoed across the ridgeline. Mortar fire to the north, the distant rattle of machine guns, the occasional boom of naval artillery from the fleet offshore. They'd been assigned 2 Okinawan civilians as guides. Standard practice now that the civilians were coming out of hiding, or realizing the Americans weren't going to kill them like the Japanese army had promised. One was a young man, maybe 19. The other was old enough to be Hendricks' grandfather, his face a topography of wrinkles, his hands gnarled from decades of farm work. Neither spoke English. The interpreter, a Nisei corporal named Takahashi, walked between them. The old man had been silent all morning, hadn't flinched when they'd passed the bloated corpses of Japanese soldiers, hadn't reacted when a sniper round cracked overhead and sent them all diving for cover, stone-faced through everything. That's why Hendricks noticed when he stopped walking. They were still 30 yards from the cave entrance, just a black mouth in the hillside, partially obscured by vegetation, looked like every other cave they'd encountered. But the old man had stopped and planted his feet. When the young guide urged him forward, he shook his head. Once. Final. "What's the problem?" Hendricks called back. Takahashi spoke to the old man in Japanese. The exchange was brief. The old man's response was 2 words. Takahashi's face changed. Not fear exactly. Something worse. Recognition. "He says we can't go in that one, Corporal." "The hell we can't. That's our objective." "He says..." Takahashi hesitated. "He says it's Kijimuna Yabu." "Which means what?" "Demon cave. He says something lives there. Something old." Hendricks had heard this kind of superstitious nonsense before. Locals warning them away from certain areas because of spirits or curses or bad luck. Command had made it clear, mission over superstition. The caves had to be cleared, all of them. "Tell him we appreciate the warning, but we're going in anyway," Takahashi translated. The old man's response was longer this time. As he spoke, his eyes stayed fixed on the cave entrance. He wasn't looking at Hendrix. He was watching that darkness like it might notice him looking. He says his uncle disappeared in that cave 20 years ago. They never found the body. He says the Kijimuna took him. He says they take everyone who goes deep enough. Right. Well, we'll take our chances. Let's move. The old man didn't move. The young guide tugged at his arm. Nothing. Then Hendrix saw it, tears running down the weathered face. The old man was crying. Silent tears, no sound, but they were there. And his hands were shaking. In 2 years of combat, Hendrix had never seen this man react to anything. Not the bombing, not the bodies, not the snipers, nothing. That should have been enough. That should have told him everything he needed to know. But Hendrix had his orders. Fine, they can wait here. We go in without them. The cave mouth was 7 feet high, maybe 5 feet wide. The vegetation around it looked wrong somehow. Too lush, too green, like the plants were growing faster here than they should. The smell reached them at 20 yards. Sweet, almost floral. But underneath that sweetness was something else. Something that made Hendrix's stomach clench. Private Wilson, walking point, stopped at the entrance. "Sir, you smell that?" "I smell it. That ain't right." "Nothing about this island is right, Wilson. Check your flashlight and move in." They entered in 2-man teams, 5-second intervals. Hendrix went in fourth, and after Wilson and Kowalski had confirmed the first 20 feet were clear. The temperature dropped immediately. Impossible, but undeniable. Outside it was 90 degrees. Inside it felt like 70. In a coral cave in Okinawa, in April. His flashlight beam cut through darkness that seemed thicker than it should be, like the light had to work harder to penetrate. The tunnel descended at a gentle angle, the floor worn smooth by centuries of water flow. The walls showed tool marks in places. This cave had been worked by human hands, expanded, improved. But those marks looked old, far older than anything the Japanese could have done. 30 feet in, Wilson's voice came back. "Got something here, Corporal?" Hendrix moved forward. The tunnel had widened into a small chamber, maybe 15 feet across. Japanese equipment was scattered across the floor. Ammo boxes, canteens, a Type 99 rifle still loaded, propped against the wall, ration tins, a medical kit, all of it abandoned. "They left in a hurry," Kowalski said. But that wasn't quite right. Hendrix picked up one of the canteens, still half full. The ration tins were unopened. You didn't abandon food and water unless something made you run. Something immediate. Something terrifying. "Check the rifle," he said. Wilson picked it up, worked the bolt. 8 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, safety's off. A soldier didn't abandon a loaded rifle. Not ever. Not unless picking it up meant dying. On the wall behind where the rifle had been, Hendrix's light caught something carved into the stone. Recent work, the cut still sharp. He didn't recognize the symbols, and not Japanese characters. Something else. "Takahashi," he called back toward the entrance. "Get in here." The interpreter appeared a moment later, flashlight beam dancing across the walls. Hendrix pointed to the carving. "What's that say?" Takahashi went pale. His flashlight hand started shaking, just slightly. "It's old Okinawan, not Japanese. It says..." He paused. "It says, 'Forgive our intrusion.'" The Japanese left that? Must have. It's recent. They were asking forgiveness from whatever they thought lived here. The smell was stronger in the chamber. That sweet flower scent, cloying now, making it hard to breathe deeply. And underneath it, something else. Something that smelled like meat left in the sun, but cold somehow. Rotten and cold at the same time. "Tunnel keeps going," Wilson said, pointing his light toward the back of the chamber. The darkness there looked absolute. The flashlight beam seemed to stop at the threshold, like the darkness beyond was too thick to penetrate fully. That's when they heard it. Not a Japanese voice, not an animal sound, not anything Hendricks could identify or classify or explain. It came from deep in the tunnel, from a distance he couldn't judge, a sound like breathing, but larger than any human lungs could produce. And underneath that, something rhythmic, almost like speech, but in no language Hendricks had ever heard. Every man in that chamber went still. "Contact?" Wilson whispered. Hendricks didn't answer. He was trying to process what his ears were telling him. The sound wasn't moving closer. It was just there. Constant. Patient. Like whatever made it had been making it for a very long time, and would continue making it long after they left. "Movement," Kowalski hissed. "Deep in the tunnel." Hendricks swung his light to join the others. For just a moment, at the very edge of where their beams could reach, he saw shapes. Multiple shapes. They moved wrong. Too fluid, too fast, joints bending in directions that didn't match human anatomy. Small bodies, but not children. The proportions were wrong. The way they moved was wrong. And then they were gone. Not retreating, just gone, like they'd never been there. "Did you see?" Wilson started. "We're leaving," Hendricks said. His voice didn't sound like his own. "Now, everyone out. Maintain formation. Do not run." Because something in his hindbrain, something older than his engineering degree or his military training, now was screaming at him that if they ran, those things would chase. And if those things chased, none of them would reach the entrance. They backed out of the cave in good order, lights trained on that rear chamber until they'd cleared the entrance. The sweet smell followed them out, clinging to their uniforms. The old Okinawan was still standing where they'd left him, still crying. When Hendricks emerged into the sunlight, the old man looked at him and nodded once. A sad, knowing nod. The nod of someone who'd tried to warn them and been ignored. Hendricks wanted to ask him what those things were, wanted to demand answers. But the look in the old man's eyes stopped him. That look said the old man had been asking the same question for 20 years. Ever since his uncle went into that cave and never came out. That look said there were no answers. Only the certainty that some caves in Okinawa weren't defended by men. 3 days passed before Hendricks heard about the second incident. 3 days of normal cave clearing operations, 3 days of trying to convince himself that what he'd seen in Cave 23 had been shadows and exhaustion, that the sound had been wind through the tunnels, that the abandoned Japanese equipment meant nothing. Then Sergeant Frank Koslow walked into the command tent with burns on his forearms and a look in his eyes that Hendricks recognized immediately. Koslow was 41 years old, ancient by Marine standards. He'd lied about his age to enlist after Pearl Harbor, had survived Tarawa and Saipan, had a Purple Heart and a reputation for being unshakable. Men half his age looked to him for steadiness. Hendricks had seen him walk through mortar fire to pull a wounded man to safety without his expression changing. But Koslow's hands were shaking when he set down his M1 carbine. The burns weren't the problem. Burns happened in cave fighting, flamethrowers, phosphorus grenades, cooking off ammunition. What made Hendricks' stomach drop was where Koslow had been operating. The Shuri line, a different cave system, miles from Cave 23. Koslow had been tasked with clearing a tunnel network the Japanese had converted into a field hospital and ammunition depot. High-value target. His squad had gone in at dawn with a flamethrower team and enough firepower to level a city block. They'd encountered the same thing Hendricks had. The story came out in pieces over the next hour. Kozlow wasn't a man who talked much, and getting this out of him felt like pulling shrapnel from a wound. But Hendricks needed to know, and needed to confirm he wasn't losing his mind. Kozlow's squad had been assigned 3 Okinawan guides. Different civilians from a different village, no connection to the old man who'd warned Hendricks. But when they'd approached the cave entrance, all 3 had stopped, refused to go further, used the same words. Kijimuna Yabu. Kozlow had ignored them. Mission came first. The first 2 chambers had been empty of Japanese troops, but full of evidence they'd left recently. Medical supplies, ammunition crates, and something else. Something that made Kozlow's interpreter, a Kibei sergeant named Yamamoto, go completely silent. Shinto offering bowls, small ceramic dishes arranged in a semicircle, each containing rotted fruit and what looked like fish. In front of the bowls, someone had scratched protective symbols into the cave floor, unward marks, the kind used to keep evil spirits away. Yamamoto said the Japanese soldiers had been making offerings, Kozlow said, his voice flat. Not to the emperor, not to their ancestors, to whatever lived in that cave. Asking it not to hurt them, asking permission to be there. The tunnel system went deeper than the maps indicated. The Japanese had been expanding it, but at some point they'd stopped. Just stopped mid-excavation and sealed off the deeper sections with rubble and timbers. Kozlow's demolition man had cleared the barrier. Standard procedure, you never left unexplored tunnels behind you. That's where ambushes came from. The tunnel beyond the barrier was different. Older, Kozlow said. You could see where the Japanese excavation stopped and the natural cave began. But it wasn't natural either. The walls were too smooth, too regular, like something had carved them. Something with tools, but not human tools. The marks were wrong. They'd proceeded another 50 yards. The temperature had dropped. Same impossible cold Hendricks had felt. And the smell, that sweet, rotting flower smell that didn't belong underground. Kozlow's squad had gotten to a chamber when every flashlight died simultaneously. All of them. Fresh batteries. 6 lights. All dead in the same instant. In the absolute darkness, they'd heard breathing. Multiple sources surrounding them. Then something had touched Private Morrison. Morrison screamed. Not the yell of a man taking fire or the shout of someone wounded. A scream of pure animal terror. The kind of sound Kozlow said he'd never heard from a combat marine. In the chaos, someone triggered the flamethrower. 40 feet of jellied gasoline spraying blind into the darkness. The cave lit up like daylight for 3 seconds. Kozlow had seen them in that light. Small, he said. Maybe 4 feet tall, but not children. Not anything like children. The skin was dark red, almost brown. The limbs were too long for the body. Arms that hung past the knees. Hands with too many fingers, or maybe too few, I couldn't tell in the light. The faces... He stopped, took a breath. The faces looked almost human, almost. But the eyes were too large, and the mouths. Jesus Christ, the mouths were wrong, too wide, opened too far back. The flamethrower blast had scattered them, not killed them, scattered them. They'd moved so fast the fire couldn't track them, like water flowing around an obstacle. Kozlow had grabbed Morrison and ordered the retreat. They'd made it back to the entrance through sheer momentum and Morrison's screaming, which had finally stopped when they hit daylight. Morrison's injuries were the reason Kozlow looked like he'd aged 10 years. The burns were superficial. He'd been too close when the flamethrower discharged. But his left hand was worse. The palm showed a pattern of small circular impressions, 6 of them, arranged in a grip pattern, like something had grabbed his hand. But the spacing was wrong. Too many contact points. and the tissue damage suggested crushing force far beyond what a human grip could produce. The medical officer had taken photographs, documented the injuries, and admitted he had no explanation for the pattern. Morrison himself was worse than his injuries. He'd been evacuated to the field hospital and hadn't spoken since. Wouldn't speak, just stared at his bandaged hand and shook his head whenever anyone asked what grabbed him. "The Okinawan guides," Kozlov said. "When we came out, they were gone. Yamamoto said they'd run the moment we entered. Just abandoned their posts and ran. He found them later in the village, told them what happened. You know what they said?" Hendricks waited. "They said Morrison was lucky. Said usually the Kijimuna don't let go. Said if we'd gone deeper, none of us would have come out. They asked Yamamoto why we went in at all when we'd been warned. Asked why Americans don't listen." Kozlov looked at Hendricks directly for the first time. "You've seen them too, I can tell. You know I'm not making this up." Hendricks nodded slowly. "Cave 23, 3 days ago. Different guides, same warning, same result. We didn't go as deep as you did. But we saw movement, heard sounds, found Japanese equipment abandoned with protective wards carved into the walls. How many caves are there on this island? Thousands. How many of them are like this?" Hendricks didn't have an answer, but he was starting to suspect that the Japanese defenders hadn't evacuated certain cave systems because of American pressure. They'd evacuated because something else had been there first. Something that didn't distinguish between Japanese soldiers and American Marines. Something that saw all of them as invaders. Something that had been patient for centuries and was patient still. Kozlov picked up his carbine. The burns on his forearms were already blistering. "I'm putting in for transfer. I've got enough points to rotate home. I'm not going in another cave on this island. I don't care what command orders." He paused at the tent entrance. Morrison's hand. "The medical officer showed me the photographs before he sent them up to division. I counted the marks. There were 6 impression points in his palm. 6 fingers or talons or whatever the hell those things have. Not 5. 6. Then he was gone, leaving Hendricks alone with the certainty that what he'd seen in Cave 23 wasn't unique, wasn't isolated, and wasn't going to stop just because they wanted it to. Command needed answers, and they knew exactly who to ask. Lieutenant William Chen spoke 3 dialects of Japanese and enough Okinawan to get by. He'd grown up in San Francisco's Japantown before the war, had volunteered for military intelligence despite knowing his parents were in Manzanar. He'd been trained to extract information from prisoners, to read captured documents, to understand the enemy's thinking. He was good at his job because he understood that information came from trust, not intimidation. When reports started filtering up to division about squads refusing to enter certain caves, about Okinawan guides abandoning their posts, about Marines seeing things that didn't match any known Japanese tactics, Chen was assigned to investigate. Not because command believed something supernatural was happening, because they needed to know if the Japanese were using psychological warfare, to gas attacks, hallucinogens, something that could be countered and defeated. Chen interviewed 12 Marines across 4 different incidents. Their stories matched too closely to be coincidence. Different caves, different squads, different times. But the same details kept appearing. The impossible cold, the sweet smell, the abandoned Japanese equipment, the protective wards, the small red-skinned figures moving too fast in the darkness. And every single incident had started the same way, with Okinawan guides refusing to proceed, with the same 2 words, Kijimuna Yabu. Chen decided he needed to talk to someone who actually understood what that meant. The elder's name was Tamaki. He was 73 years old and had spent his entire life in a village 2 miles from the Shuri line. His village no longer existed. American artillery had erased it in the first week of the invasion. But Tamaki had survived by hiding in a cave that the Marines hadn't bothered to clear yet. Not one of the inhabited ones. He was careful about which caves he chose. Chen found him through the civilian resettlement network, brought him to a quiet corner of the logistics area, and offered him the last of his personal ration of canned peaches. Trust first, questions after. Tamaki ate slowly, methodically. When he finished, he looked at Chen with eyes that held no illusions about what the young lieutenant wanted. "You want to know about the Kijimuna?" he said in Okinawan. Not a question. Chen nodded. "Your people keep warning us about certain caves. We need to understand why. Because those caves belong to them. They have always belonged to them." "Them? You mean the Kijimuna?" "Yes, the old ones. The mountain people. They were here before the Ryukyu kings, before the Chinese came, before we built our first village. They are part of this island the way the corral is part of the reef." Chen pulled out his notebook. "Can you describe them?" Tamaki was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of first-hand knowledge. "I saw one when I was 12 years old. My father took me fishing on the north coast. We found a cave where the water came in at high tide. We thought we could trap fish there. We went in at low tide. It was waiting." He described what he'd seen in terms that matched what Kozlo had reported. Small body, no taller than a child. Reddish-brown skin that looked like old leather. Arms that hung too long, ending in hands with 6 fingers each. The face almost human, but fundamentally wrong. Eyes too large and completely black, no whites at all. Mouth that extended too far back along the jaw. "It didn't attack us," Tamaki said. "It just watched. My father made me back away slowly. We left our fishing nets there, never went back. That cave belongs to them." "How many caves?" "On this island? Maybe 7 or 8 that everyone knows about. Maybe more that only the Kijimuna know. We learn which ones to avoid when we're children. We teach our children. It's survived as knowledge for centuries." Chen leaned forward. "The Japanese soldiers, did they know?" "Some of them learned. We tried to warn them when they first came, when they started building their defenses. Some listened, most didn't. The ones who went into the forbidden caves." He paused. "Some came out changed, refused to speak about what they'd seen. Others didn't come out at all. Eventually, the Japanese officers marked those caves as off-limits. They didn't believe in Kijimuna, but they believed in their men disappearing." "What do the Kijimuna want?" "Want?" Tamaki looked puzzled by the question. "They don't want anything from us. They want us to leave them alone. They were here first. These are their mountains, their caves. We are the ones who built villages on their land. As long as we respect the boundaries, they respect ours. But when you go into their places, when you bring fire and explosives and violence..." He shook his head. "They defend what's theirs." Chen pulled out a map and spread it on the ground. "Can you show me which caves your people avoid?" Tamaki studied the map for several minutes, and then pointed to 7 locations scattered across southern Okinawa. Chen felt his stomach sink. He cross-referenced the positions with his incident reports. Perfect match. Every cave where Marines had encountered the impossible was a cave Tamaki's people had been avoiding for generations. "My uncle went into one of these caves 34 years ago," Tamaki said quietly, pointing to a location near Shuri. "We found his sandals at the entrance 3 days later. Nothing else. The cave mouth collapsed in a storm the following year. We took it as a mercy. It meant his bones would stay buried. It meant the Kijimuna wouldn't throw him out." "Throw him out?" "They don't keep the bodies. When they're finished, they leave them at the entrance, as a warning. My uncle's body never appeared. We think he went too deep, almost too far into their territory to be brought back. Chen looked at the 7 marked locations on his map. "Lieutenant, I need you to understand something. Your Marines are brave. They fight well. But bravery means nothing to the Kijimuna. Neither do your weapons. They were ancient when the first humans came to this island. They will be here when the last human leaves. They are patient, they are territorial, and they do not forgive intrusion." He met Chen's eyes directly. "You should mark these caves on your maps. Tell your commanders to seal them, not to clear them, to seal them and walk away. Some battles cannot be won because they should never be fought." Chen thanked him for his time, gave him the rest of his rations, watched the old man shuffle back toward the civilian camps, his warning delivered, his conscience clear. And then Chen wrote his report, documented everything, included Tamaki's marked locations, recommended that those 7 caves be sealed immediately without further investigation. The report went up through channels. Chen never saw it again. It was classified the day it reached division headquarters and remained classified for the next 60 years. But someone must have read it, because within a week, all 7 caves Tamaki had identified were collapsed with demolition charges. The official reason: structural instability. The real reason died with the men who gave the orders. But before those caves could be sealed, one final squad received orders that would change everything. May 18th, 1945. The battle for Okinawa had become a grinding war of attrition. Every yard cost blood. Every cave held death. Command was pushing hard to break the Shuri line before the rainy season turned the island into impassable mud. Intelligence had identified a cave system that connected multiple Japanese defensive positions. If it could be cleared and held, it would open a corridor through their lines. That cave system included Cave 23. Colonel Morrison, no relation to the private who'd been grabbed, called Hendricks into the command tent at 0600 hours. The colonel was a hard man who'd fought through Guadalcanal and Peleliu, who measured success in terrain taken and casualties inflicted, or he had no patience for what he called superstitious nonsense. "Your squad withdrew from Cave 23 3 weeks ago," the colonel said without preamble. "Report says you encountered possible enemy resistance and tactical complications." That was how Hendricks had written it. Vague enough to be technically true, specific enough to justify withdrawal. "Yes, sir." "Well, those tactical complications are now strategic priorities. S2 has confirmed the cave system connects to at least 3 Japanese strongpoints. We need it cleared. Today. You're taking your squad back in, reinforced with a flamethrower team and a demolition specialist. You will proceed to the end of the tunnel system, map all connections, and clear any enemy presence. Understood?" Hendricks felt his mouth go dry. "Sir, I should mention that local guides have indicated—" "I don't give a damn what the locals indicate, Corporal. Half of them are still loyal to the Japanese. The other half are terrified of their own shadows. You have your orders." "Yes, sir." The colonel's expression softened slightly. "Look, Hendricks, I know cave fighting is hell. I know what happened to Koslow's squad. But we can't let fear of the dark stop us from doing our jobs. These are caves. Nothing more. The Japs want us to think they're haunted. Psychological warfare. Don't fall for it." Hendricks didn't argue. There was no point. The colonel hadn't seen what moved in that darkness, hadn't heard that breathing, hadn't felt that cold. By 0800 hours, his squad had been reinforced to 15 men. 8 from his original unit who'd been with him the first time, on 7 new replacements who'd arrived on the island 2 weeks ago, fresh faces who still thought they were invincible. The flamethrower team was led by a corporal named Briggs, who'd burned out 17 caves without hesitation. The demolition man was a wiry private named Yates, who could blow a bunker or disarm a mine with equal skill. The Okinawan guides assigned to them took one look at the objective and walked away. Didn't ask permission, didn't explain, just walked away. The interpreter, a different man than Takahashi, told Hendricks they'd said something about not being paid enough to die for Americans who didn't listen. One of the new men, Private Davis, laughed. Scared of a cave. These people are pathetic. Hendricks wanted to hit him, wanted to make him understand that those civilians knew something Davis didn't. But orders were orders. They entered Cave 23 at 08:45 hours. The smell hit them immediately. That sweet, rotting flower scent, stronger now than it had been 3 weeks ago. Like whatever produced it had grown more concentrated, more present. The first chamber looked the same. The abandoned Japanese equipment was still there, though some of it had been moved. The rifle Hendricks had seen propped against the wall was now lying on the floor, 10 feet from where it had been. No one had been in this cave. The entrance had been under marine observation for 3 weeks. But something had moved that rifle. The protective wards carved into the wall had been scratched over. Deep gouges through the symbols, like something with claws, had deliberately destroyed them. Jesus, Wilson muttered. What happened here? They pushed deeper. The new men's bravado faded as the temperature dropped. At 100 yards in, their breath was visible in the flashlight beams. Impossible. It was 85 degrees outside. At 150 yards, they found the chamber Hendricks had retreated from before. The tunnel continued beyond it, descending at a steeper angle. The map said the system only went 200 yards total. But that tunnel kept going. Down into darkness their lights couldn't fully penetrate. We're at the map limit, Yates said, checking his compass. Whatever's beyond this point isn't on any of our surveys. Then we survey it, Hendricks said. Not because he wanted to, but because turning back meant court-martial. They descended. The tunnel opened into a chamber that shouldn't exist. 30 feet across, maybe 20 feet high, and the walls were covered in carvings. Not Japanese, not Okinawan. Older, symbols that hurt to look at, that seemed to shift in the flashlight beams. The floor was worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. And there were bones, human bones, scattered around the edges of the chamber. Some were ancient, the color of old ivory. Others were newer. Hendricks saw a femur that still had dried tissue attached, a skull with the distinctive shape of Japanese army dental work, and something that made his blood freeze. An American dog tag, the chain broken, lying in a pile of finger bones. Private Davis picked up the dog tag, read the name stamped on it. This says Kawamoto, K, 2nd Marines. How the hell? Put it down, Hendricks said. Oh, but 2nd Marines haven't been in this sector. I said put it down. The temperature had dropped below freezing. Their breath came out in clouds. In the flashlight beams, frost was forming on the walls. In Okinawa, in May. Underground where temperature should remain constant. From the far side of the chamber, they heard it. That breathing, massive and slow, patient. And underneath it, voices. Multiple voices speaking in unison in a language that sounded like stone grinding against stone. Contact front, Wilson said, his voice breaking. His rifle swung toward the darkness. Then the lights started dying. Not all at once like with Koslow's squad, one by one, methodically. Like something was moving among them in the darkness, touching each flashlight, killing each beam. First Davis's light went out, then Private Kowalski's, and then the flamethrower team's handheld torches. Everyone fall back, Hendricks shouted. Maintain contact, move to the exit. But they weren't alone in the chamber anymore. Hendricks saw them clearly this time. His light was still working, and in its beam he counted at least 20 of them. emerging from cracks in the walls he hadn't noticed, from shadows that were too deep, from nowhere. Small bodies with reddish-brown skin that looked like old leather stretched over wrong bones. Arms that hung to their knees, hands with 6 fingers each ending in black talons. Faces that were almost human. 2 eyes, nose, mouth, but fundamentally alien. The eyes were completely black and too large, taking up 1/3 of the face. The mouths were wider than any human mouth, extending back past where the jawline should end. And they were coordinated, moving together like a school of fish, cutting off the exit, herding the squad deeper into the chamber. One of them stepped into Hendricks' light fully. It was less than 4 feet tall, but there was nothing childlike about it. The intelligence in those black eyes was ancient and cold. It looked at Hendricks the way a man looks at an insect in his home. Unwanted, tolerated until now. But limits existed. It opened its mouth and made a sound. Not speech exactly, but close. A clicking, grinding vocalization that somehow conveyed meaning. Leave. "Weapons free!" Briggs shouted and triggered the flamethrower. 40 feet of jellied gasoline sprayed across the chamber. The creatures scattered, moving so fast they blurred. The fire revealed more of them on the walls, clinging to the ceiling, dozens more than Hendricks had initially seen. The chamber lit up like daylight, and he saw the full extent of what they'd walked into. The carvings on the walls weren't decorative. They were territorial markers. This chamber had been theirs for centuries, maybe millennia, and every bone on the floor was a warning that had been ignored. The creatures didn't burn. The fire passed over them, and they emerged unscathed, their skin smoking but undamaged. Whatever they were, flame couldn't hurt them. "Fall back! Everyone move!" Hendricks was screaming now. One of the creatures grabbed Private Yates, just reached out casually and took hold of his ankle as he tried to run. Yates went down hard, his head cracking against stone. He was screaming, kicking, trying to break free. The creature's grip didn't budge. More of them swarmed over him. 4, 5, 6 small bodies covering him. Hendricks could see Yates's face in the firelight, could see his mouth open in a scream that went beyond sound. Wilson fired his M1. The rounds hit the creatures on top of Yates. Hendricks heard the bullets impact flesh. But the creatures didn't fall, didn't even slow down. They just turned their heads toward Wilson with that same cold intelligence. "Leave him." Hendricks grabbed Wilson's arm. "We can't help him." They ran. Discipline abandoned, formation forgotten. Just 15 men running in blind panic through darkness. Behind them, Yates's screaming continued, echoing through the tunnels, following them all the way to the entrance. They emerged into daylight at 0927 hours. 14 men, not 15. Yates's screaming stopped at 0931 hours. Hendricks knew the time because he was staring at his watch, counting the seconds, and praying it would stop. When it finally did, the silence was worse. Within hours, Hendricks was sitting across from men who had already decided what the truth would be. The debriefing took place in a sealed tent with Colonel Morrison, a major from Division Intelligence, and a stenographer who was ordered to take no notes. Hendricks sat across from them with his hands shaking so badly he had to clench them between his knees. The colonel's first question was direct. "Where is Private Yates?" "In the cave, sir. We couldn't retrieve him." "Couldn't or wouldn't?" "Both, sir." The major leaned forward. "Corporal Hendricks, your report states that Private Yates was killed by hostile fire and that the cave entrance subsequently collapsed due to structural instability. Is that correct?" Hendricks looked at him, looked at the absolute certainty in the major's eyes that this was the story that would be told, in the story that was already written. "No, sir, that's not what happened." "Then what did happen?" Hendricks told them. Everything. The chamber, the bones, the creatures, The coordinated attack, Yates being taken. He told it straight and simple, the way he'd been trained to give after-action reports. Facts only, no interpretation. When he finished, the silence in the tent lasted 30 seconds. The colonel spoke first. "You're telling me that Private First Class Robert Yates was killed by cave-dwelling creatures that don't burn and can't be shot. Do I have that right?" "Yes, sir." "And you expect me to put that in an official report?" "I'm telling you what happened, sir." The major pulled out a folder. "Corporal, we've received similar reports from 7 other units operating in this sector. 7, all describing encounters with small humanoid entities in specific cave systems. All involving Okinawan guides refusing to enter. All resulting in casualties or near casualties." He paused. "Do you know what Division thinks about these reports?" "No, sir." "Division thinks we have a serious morale problem. Thinks the stress of cave fighting is causing mass hysteria. Thinks the Japanese have somehow convinced the local population to spread ghost stories to make our men afraid to do their jobs." "That's not what this is, sir." "No? Then what is it?" Hendricks met his eyes. "It's a warning we should have listened to." The colonel stood up, his face red. "We don't listen to superstitious nonsense, Corporal. We follow orders and complete our missions. You were ordered to clear that cave system. Instead, you lost a man and retreated without accomplishing your objective. We retreated because staying meant losing everyone. That's not your call to make." The major put a hand on the colonel's arm. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, dangerous. "Here's what's going to happen, Corporal. You're going to sign a statement saying that Private Yates was killed by Japanese holdouts in Cave 23. That your squad engaged the enemy, suffered casualties, and withdrew when the cave entrance became structurally unstable due to ongoing combat. The entrance will be sealed by demolition teams for safety reasons. This conversation never happened. Understood? And if I refuse? Then you'll be charged with dereliction of duty, cowardice in the face of the enemy, and abandoning a wounded man. You'll be court-martialed and likely executed. Your squad will be disbanded and scattered. And Cave 23 will be sent to the next unit in line with orders to clear it completely. More men will die. Is that what you want?" Hendricks felt the trap close around him. Sign the false report and live with the lie. Refuse and condemn other men to face what he'd faced. He signed. Every member of his squad signed identical statements. One by one, in separate tents, they were brought in and given the same choice: sign or face court-martial. Every man signed. The alternative versions they'd written, the real reports, were collected and burned. Cave 23 was collapsed with demolition charges on May 20th, 1945. The explosion was visible from 2 miles away. When the dust settled, the entrance was buried under 20 feet of rubble. The demolition team reported hearing sounds from inside the cave before they detonated. Sounds like screaming. They were told it was structural stress. Rocks shifting. They knew better. 6 more caves were sealed in the following week. All of them matched locations on the map Lieutenant Chen had submitted. All of them sealed without being cleared. The official reason remained structural instability. The unofficial reason was never discussed. Private First Class Robert Yates was listed as killed in action on May 18, 1945. His body was listed as unrecoverable due to cave collapse. His mother received a telegram 3 weeks later. She was told her son died a hero, fighting to the last against enemy forces. She was never told that he'd been taken alive into the darkness and that his screaming had lasted 4 minutes. Hendricks shipped home in November 1945 with an honorable discharge and a combat action ribbon. He never spoke about Cave 23 to anyone outside his squad. The official version became the version he told himself over and over, until he almost believed it. Almost. but he developed severe claustrophobia that made even riding in elevators impossible. He'd been studying engineering before the war, planning to design bridges and buildings. After the war, he became a landscape architect, worked exclusively outdoors, never went underground again for any reason. Sergeant Coslow rotated home in June 1945. He'd accumulated enough points after the Morrison incident to request stateside duty. He spent the rest of his life in Montana, working as a hunting guide in the mountains. Wide open spaces, clear sight lines, nothing overhead but sky. Private Morrison's hand never fully recovered. The pattern of impressions remained visible as scar tissue for the rest of his life. 6 circular marks across his palm. He refused to discuss what made them. When his children asked about the scars, he told them it was a war injury and changed the subject. 3 members of Hendricks' original squad, Wilson, Kowalski, and Davis, refused to ever discuss May 18th. They took what happened in Cave 23 to their graves. Their families never knew. 2 others, interviewed separately in the 1980s for an oral history project, confirmed Hendricks' account in detail. Both requested their testimony remain sealed until after their deaths. Both died within 6 months of giving their interviews. The official reports remained classified for 60 years. When they were finally declassified in 2005, all references to the creatures had been redacted. Only the cover story remained, but the caves stayed sealed. Decades later, the evidence speaks louder than any official denial. The photographs of Private Morrison's hand exist in the National Archives. Medical Documentation File 45-OKI-7734, taken by Navy Corpsman Thomas Aldridge on May 14, 1945. 3 black and white images showing 6 circular contusions arranged in a grip pattern. Each impression approximately 0.4 inches in diameter. Tissue damage consistent with crushing force estimated at over 200 pounds per square inch. The corpsman's handwritten notes in the margin are less clinical. Patient insists he was grabbed by a small humanoid entity with 6 fingers. Adamant about finger count. Marks support his claim. No explanation available. When the photographs were declassified in 2005, 3 independent medical examiners studied them. None could explain the pattern. One noted that the spacing and force distribution were inconsistent with human anatomy or any known primate. Morrison's hand tells a story his mouth never would. The 7 caves sealed in May 1945 remain sealed today. They are not marked on civilian maps. They do not appear in tourist guides. Japanese self-defense force training exercises specifically avoid those sectors. The official response when asked is archaeological preservation zones. The unofficial response, shared quietly among JSDF officers, those areas are off-limits. They have always been off-limits. They will remain off-limits. Local Okinawans still know which caves to avoid. In 1997, a construction company proposed developing a resort near Cave 23. The project had government approval and investor funding. It was shut down by local protests within 2 weeks. When pressed for details, protest leaders would only say that some places were forbidden for reasons that predated the war, predated the American occupation, predated recorded history. The construction workers walked off the job before protests even began. 3 reported hearing sounds from underground. The lead foreman, a man named Nakamura, who'd worked construction across Okinawa for 30 years, submitted his resignation the same day. I've worked near old battlefields. I've excavated burial grounds. This was different. The ground itself felt wrong, like we were being watched from below. The resort was never built. The land remains undeveloped. In 2015, an American graduate student requested permission to survey the sealed caves for his dissertation, when the final rejection came from an Okinawan elder council. These caves were closed for reasons that remain valid. They should not be opened. They should not be entered. This is not a request. This is a warning. The student later noted that every official document about the sealed caves from 1945 to the present used identical language. Structurally unstable. 70 years of reports. Dozens of different authors, all using the exact same phrase. The caves remain sealed. And on certain nights, according to farmers whose families have worked the same land for generations, sounds still emerge from the mountains. Sounds like breathing. Sounds like waiting. James Hendricks gave his final interview in October 1989, 3 months after doctors told him the lung cancer was terminal. He was 64 years old. He'd living in a small house in rural Oregon with windows on all sides and no basement. The interviewer, a retired Army historian named Michael Garrett, arrived with a tape recorder. Hendricks started talking and didn't stop for 2 hours. He described Cave 23 in detail he'd never shared before. The exact layout of the chamber, the pattern of bones on the floor, the carvings on the walls, and the creatures themselves. "The face is what stays with me," Hendricks said. "It was almost human. That's what made it worse. The proportions were close enough that your brain tried to categorize it as a person. But then you saw the eyes, completely black. No whites at all. And the way they moved, like they didn't have a skeleton the way we do." He described the hands, 6 fingers, each tipped with a black talon, at the grip strength that had crushed Morrison's palm. They were intelligent. When they cut us off from the exit, that was tactics. When they killed the flashlights one by one, that was psychological warfare. They knew what they were doing. They'd probably been doing it for centuries. When asked what he thought they were, Hendricks shook his head. "I spent 40 years trying to rationalize it as an undiscovered animal. But animals don't carve warnings into cave walls. Animals don't make ritual offerings. Whatever they are, they're not just animals. I think they're exactly what the Okinawans said they were. Old ones? Original inhabitants? They were there before humans settled the island. They adapted when we arrived, made their territories smaller, went deeper underground, avoided us as long as we avoided them. But the war changed that. We brought explosives and fire into their homes. We forced contact, and they defended it." His voice grew quieter. "What bothers me most isn't that we encountered them. It's that we were the invaders. They didn't care about our war. They cared about their caves, and we ignored every warning." He looked directly at the interviewer. "Yates is still in that cave. Maybe not his body, but something of him is there. They don't let go of what enters their territory. Part of me is still there too. Has been since May 18th, 1945. I can't go underground. Can't handle enclosed spaces. Can't sleep without lights on. 44 years later, and I still hear that breathing in my dreams." When asked about regrets, Hendricks said, "The old Okinawan man who cried when we approached that cave, he knew. He tried to warn us. We thought he was superstitious. But he wasn't afraid of nothing. He was afraid of something very real, something his culture had learned to coexist with by respecting boundaries we didn't believe existed." Hendricks died on January 12, 1990. His will specified cremation with ashes scattered in the Pacific Ocean. His written explanation, "Nothing underground, not ever. I won't be buried where they might find me." The tape recording of his interview was donated to the National World War II Museum in 2003. Researchers note something unusual at the 37-minute mark. A sound in the background, faint but distinct, like breathing, deep and slow and patient. The interview was conducted in Hendricks' house in Oregon. He lived alone. No pets. No ventilation system that could produce that sound. Garrett, the interviewer, died in 2007. Before his death, but he confirmed he'd heard it during the interview. Said it had made the hair on his neck stand up. Said Hendricks had heard it too, had stopped talking mid-sentence, gone pale, and stared at the corners of the room. He told me they followed him home, Garrett said. That sometimes, on quiet nights, he could hear them. Not in the house, just nearby, waiting. He said they were patient, that they could wait decades for what they wanted. He said they wanted him back, that when you enter their territory, you belong to them, and they always collect what belongs to them. Cave 23 remains sealed under 20 feet of rubble and 78 years of jungle growth. The entrance is invisible now, reclaimed by vegetation and time. But local farmers whose fields border that hillside report sounds on certain nights, usually in May, usually around the 18th. Sounds like something breathing, deep in the mountain, patient and slow. Sounds like something waiting. The Okinawans who live near the sealed caves still leave offerings. Small bowls of fruit, cups of water, tokens of respect, not because they believe in superstition, because they remember, because their grandparents remembered, because some knowledge is too important to forget. Knowledge that some boundaries exist for a reason, that some places belong to others, that some warnings should be heeded, that some caves should never be opened, and that some things, once disturbed, never really forgive. 80 years after the Battle of Okinawa, 7 caves remain sealed. They will remain sealed. Not because of structural instability, but because of what lives inside them. What has always lived inside them. What is still waiting.